Hello, everyone, and welcome back to a new episode of the Winning in Professional Services podcast. My name is Matteo, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Scott Presimone. In today's episode, we're talking about breaking down knowledge silos in professional service companies. The reason we are talking about this topic today is because, both myself and Scott, I think, have experience working at different companies throughout our career. And I talk for myself. I'll let Scott talk for himself later. But myself, I've definitely experienced this sort of siloed sort of knowledge across the company, depending on wherever I was really in which department, but there was really always kind of the feeling that I wasn't always aware of the most important things that were happening at the company. Obviously, we don't need to know everything that happens across the company, but especially when you're in a leadership position, I think that's when you want to be exposed to sort of the most important things happening in different other departments that could affect the work that you do in your department with your own team. And so I feel like knowledge sharing is one of those things that is maybe one of the biggest issues I've seen in pretty much every company I've worked at in my career, but that has never been treated as maybe a systemic issue within the company, never really considered as something that needed to be treated and sort of fixed to really help the company thrive and be more efficient and even just improve the quality of service that it provides to their clients. And so this is, in my opinion, a good reason why we're talking about this today. I want to hear from you, Scott, what your experience is with regards to this particular topic.
Sure. I think every business I've either worked at or worked with has experienced some level of this, Matteo. So I have the same feeling as you. And I think, it's to varying levels, right? Some companies are very good at delivering messages and all hands meetings and having regular meetings, but there's always some level of missing information or people working on the same task or not knowing that some event is happening or whatever it may be. There's not really a good method to distribute information so that everyone's, quote, on the same page. So like I said, it's of varying levels of problem, but I think almost every company experiences some level of this, and I think you have to take it seriously, and always there has to be an effort to distribute information in a good way so that we don't run into a lot of customer service issues or frustrations between departments. I mean, there's a lot of problems that can come downstream from this, so I think it's a great topic.
Yeah, and actually, I think there's maybe a couple different ways to look at this sort of knowledge sharing issue or sort of problematic that companies could face. One is generally being aware of the day-to-day operations and what's happening sort of within your team or within the company across different teams. But another way I look at this is also about processes and workflows. Like, are there documented processes for everything that, people within the company do. Because eventually, when there's turnover within the company, whenever somebody leaves and somebody new joins, how do the new joiners, for example, get up to speed when it comes to, the tasks that they are assigned to? How do those people, learn what they have to do? Are they getting trained by somebody? Do they need to shadow somebody? Do they have processes that they can follow and then potentially get feedback on? So I think there's maybe a couple ways to look at how knowledge sharing impacts a company's efficiency, in my opinion. But what is really the downside of not having a good knowledge sharing practice within the company? I can think of a couple. One is delayed project deliveries. So, for example, in my previous company at a digital marketing agency, there were times where once a new client was, once the client sort of signed on the dotted line for a new service, the delivery team at that point was kind of responsible for the onboarding of the client. And there were a couple of instances where clients were kind of left in the limbo for maybe 24 up to 48 hours. And the reason there was because maybe there wasn't as much communication between maybe the sales department, who was responsible for the client up to the point where they signed on the dotted line, and the sort of customer delivery or the service delivery team. And so maybe that's one potential sort of downside of not having that sort of good flow of communication between departments that could potentially cause this sort of project delivery issues, sort of thing. Another could be just having duplicate work across teams or even within teams. Again, like if you have a certain process to execute a certain task, and maybe that's kind of decided within the team or within the company that that's the most efficient way to do a certain thing. But then you have other people within the same sort of team doing the same task differently because for whatever other reason. I think that could potentially also cause some inefficiencies within the company or within the team itself. Because obviously if somebody takes longer to do certain tasks, that could potentially also cause issues with clients, just getting their deliverables later, for example. Scott, do you have any other ideas of what potential downsides knowledge silos could create within a company?
Sure. The big one is going to be new hires, because I do think what happens is you all get kind of used to, as a company, the different departments, what they're doing. But then when a new joiner comes in, I think it's easy to say some of these things are obvious, right? Of course, Bill in XYZ department is responsible for this, and Jill is responsible for that. The of course is where you run into troubles, right? Because you really do have to constantly reinforce some of these, whether it's what teams are responsible for, what they typically work on. You can't just give someone a onboarding document and expect them to get it all. And that's why having more touch points where they're actually being introduced to these people, not just one time, but on a regular basis. They're either going to, we'll talk about this later in the episode, but they're doing something to where they're communicating and having reasons to talk to other departments. And as a new joiner, you're just going to learn a lot faster that way. I have seen bad situations where people can be part of a company for a year and they still don't, they almost joke about the fact, I still don't know what XYZ person does or what, this other department does. And one thing, this is a side note, but one thing I always feel is useful is when someone is onboarded, to introduce them to other team members, not just with a passing by in the office, but actually saying, go ask, these 10 people, these 5 questions, and have a conversation with them. Then if you can actually get to know them on a personal level, that's a helpful first step to getting communication going and having them actually know what the person does to a certain extent. And then if you're having some cross-functional meetings and you're then having better conversations with those people in a work aspect, then you're going to really have an idea of what they're doing. So that will help get a new joiner up to speed much, much faster, in my opinion.
Yeah, I like the idea of having face-to-face conversations or whatever, Zoom conversations if you're a remote company with sort of the most important people or the people that will potentially be having the most interactions with in the future as soon as you start at a new company. Personally, what I liked to do every time I joined a new company in the past was, and this was because it didn't exist at the companies I worked at, but I liked to map out a sort of an organizational chart and also the communication flow between people, like who are or where are the most common communication flows happening within the company. Say, at a digital marketing agency, the previous company I was working at, a lot of communication was happening between, say, the digital marketing team, the sort of the service delivery team for marketing services, and the support team. and the support specialists, or maybe I was the sort of the head of the team. I was talking a lot with the operations manager at the company or the finance department, and who exactly within the finance department was I talking to for what. And that helped me a lot when it came to sort of troubleshooting issues related to my role. I knew exactly who I needed to talk to, but it really strikes me still to this day how many companies still don't have this kind of organizational charts mapped out with the exact sort of communication flows that happen within the company, within teams, and across different teams. I think those would be extremely helpful to really bring people up to speed as fast as possible, because I think already it takes for a new joiner, at least in my own experience, up to 6 months to really feel kind of acclimatized at a new environment and the new job and new kind of responsibilities, and just also adding on top of that the fact that you need to now kind of remember a lot of new names, a lot of new processes, a lot of new sort of procedures. I think that kind of could be alleviated by having these sort of kind of maps of the organization. But I don't know what your experience of that with that, Scott.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. One thing that I experienced recently was one of the owners I work with is great and it has a lot of great skill sets, but really does not like organizational charts. And so that's one of those things where I'm always like, what's the responsibility of this person? What's the responsibility of that person? Who does that person report to? All of these things. I'll start bringing up these topics, and I realize that it's an area that he doesn't like talking about or thinking about because it's just not something he likes, right? And so I think what's something that can happen is people avoid these things because they don't like them. It's kind of like avoiding, I don't know. There's plenty of things that people avoid, and so. But the reality is, it's detrimental if you do that, right? You have to say, even if you don't like org structures, even if you don't like, updating job descriptions, these things that you don't like and you think are unnecessary, they are necessary. They absolutely are necessary. And if you don't want to do it, then you have to get someone to do it, because realistically, you're hurting a lot of your employees. I think one of the things that people can think about is, I'm too small of a company to have some strict org structure. Well, yeah, a lot of people are wearing a lot of hats, but I remember there was some, online person or YouTuber or something like that I think pointed out something, maybe it was someone on LinkedIn, but they pointed out something I really liked, which was, if you don't have certain roles in your organization, then you are doing that role, right? And so if you are small and you don't have a finance person, guess what? You're the head of finance. You're the head of HR. You're the head of operations. You're the head, right? And so if you think of it that way, then when you're a one-person company, then you are, holding 10 roles. And then if you then hire out those roles, then great, now you're not doing it. But you have to actually blame yourself if those things aren't getting done. And so my thought is that from day one, when you're starting a company, think through all those roles and start essentially acting like you're bigger than you are. So if you say today, I only have 20 employees, I only have 15 employees, I don't need to have SOPs, I don't need to have onboarding documents, and I don't need to have an org structure because excuse. The reality is you actually need it more, because guess what? It's even more important that you're very efficient at that smaller, more nimble size. And so get that stuff documented, get the SOPs, get the org structure, get all that stuff laid out, even if you have to update it every 6 months, right? But not having it means that your new joiners are now taking longer to get up to speed and they're doing more repeat work, right? And you can't take that risk. That's a huge risk as a small business to be doing that. So that's why, again, all this stuff is really important. And in my opinion, there's no excuses to not get it done.
Yeah, I like it. Honestly, I do have some experience. I don't know if this is your experience as well, Scott, but personally, I have worked at different European companies. And then after moving to Thailand, I started working for a Thai company. And then after a year or so, I moved over to an American-owned company. So where the culture was mostly American. And the experience I had with the American-owned company and management was, in my opinion, very different from every other company I ever had, I worked at in the past. Meaning that at the American-owned company, I had more of the experience where this sort of conversations were brought up a little bit more often, and where there was more awareness around certain issues that could come up because of this kind of silos that we experienced potentially as leaders. Whereas back home in Europe, even like simple things as performance reviews were not, or are probably still not a regular thing. It's probably not at the companies I worked at in the past, but as soon as I moved over to this American-owned company, performance reviews were actually a very structured process that happened every 6 months within this particular company. So I want to kind of, I don't know, maybe you have experience working with other companies other than American owned, but I want to hear from you if sort of in the United States, the idea of having kind of this, more structured processes and having these conversations around, topics like knowledge sharing and just having more documented processes across the company is kind of more common, in your opinion.
Yeah, I think it is more common. I don't have a lot of experience in other countries or in European countries, for instance, working for European countries. But I can say in the US, I was very used to having those usually annual reviews. That was the more common thing for me. And, at consulting firms, we had this thing where we'd be ranked based off the people at our level. So if it's an analyst, a consultant, whatever, then we'd be ranked, ordered every year to determine essentially what our raises are. So you'd always be assessing and having those regular assessments with your manager or boss would then help you, because you'd know that that's going to allow them to pitch you to be ranked higher in the organization so that you can get a better review. So you're always kind of working together with your manager to get better assessments and to be better represented, in that step. So everything was pretty formalized. Again, I'm not sure about every company. I was more in the typically consulting, operation, strategy sort of companies that I worked on. But I would say, I guess when I worked in Thailand, I worked for a Japanese company. It was a different industry completely, but that was not nearly as formalized. I think part of it's the size of the company again, right? Because I do think that when you have a smaller company and it's maybe a sales-oriented company, whatever else, it's going to be like, get the job done. The numbers don't lie. You have your one metric that you focus on. And in that case, you might not necessarily have a, how did you do over the last 6 months sort of discussions, because it's more like, how many sales did you make? What happened, right? And so I think it depends on the industry, depends on the size, and to your point, Matteo, very likely depends on the culture. One further thing I'll say about this is that obviously in Asia, things are a bit more indirect. So people that I've managed here in Thailand have been often appreciative of having more discussions happening above the surface. So there's plenty of good things about Asian culture, but one of the things that I found through some of the people I've managed is that they've appreciated some element of the American culture to where we're more direct and we're going to have these maybe uncomfortable discussions. And what happens though is we do have to train people to be more vocal, because remember, if you are having an assessment and the goal of the assessment is to show that you didn't do anything wrong that time, that 6 months or that 1 year, then that's kind of the saving face sort of way of doing it. Whereas if you want to promote, actually it's all about learning and it's about making mistakes, but learning from the mistakes, well, then you actually have to be able to get people to share mistakes. And that is I don't know, I think that relates to this siloing thing that we're talking about today, Matteo, because if people are not sharing what's happening and sharing the real challenges and sharing the mistakes that they made and saying, I actually made this mistake, which affected this, I need some help, everyone. If you're not raising your hand when those things are happening because you're scared of repercussions or you're scared of getting a bad review or whatever that may be, then I just think that's not going to be great for the organization as a whole. So I like the idea of, over time, building up people's confidence to share more, the goods and the bads, and then share cross-departmentally what the teams are doing and what's the good and the bads of what's happened at past events that you've hosted, whatever it may be. Share everything. And that just takes a little time to get through the organization, but I think it's very healthy once you can do that.
I agree. I think the good thing about building up a company, it's almost like you are in control of kind of the rules of the company in a way, right? So you having over communication is, in my opinion, one of the greatest strengths that could happen within an organization, and just making that kind of value sort of known across everyone joining the company as a new joiner, I think it's super important, just because people come from very different backgrounds. There are outspoken people, and there are introverts, and then there's kind of like a spectrum, and there's a bunch of people in between that could maybe talk a lot more with certain people and less with others. But just having this kind of company value, if we want to call it like that, like this, of just being over communicative with your teammates, with your managers, or across departments, I think it's super important. Which takes me actually to sort of the quick wins that companies could implement or start implementing to sort of alleviate a little bit this problem of knowledge silos within their organizations. One of which I think it's probably the easiest one to implement is really just having stand-up meetings. I mean, I've experimented myself with daily stand-ups, or bi-weekly stand-ups, or even just weekly stand-ups. But whatever cadence you decide, I think it would be just important to have this kind of routine of meeting with people within your team, but also maybe with, if you are a leader or a team leader, with other leaders from different other teams on a regular basis, and share what are sort of the blockers that are on your way to achieve your goals, share your wins, and just kind of update your peers on kind of the most important projects and tasks that you are taking care of at that moment in time. I think this is an important one, in my opinion. Scott, what is your experience with stand-ups, and maybe either other sort of solutions to alleviate this knowledge silo issue?
Well, yeah, I want to just point out something that you said about a minute ago. It was you mentioned introverts and extroverts, right? So I think that if you have a team that has a few introverts in the mix, these meetings are critical, right? They're absolutely critical, because if you're not going to have people vocalizing what's going on naturally, then I think you have to force it. You have to essentially work that muscle. And the excuse being, oh, we don't have a very talkative team, meetings are awkward, that's the reason that you must do it, right? I mean, essentially, don't make an excuse as to say, oh, people don't like talking, therefore we're not going to talk. It's like, no, that's literally avoiding the problem. So, to your point of stand-ups, I do actually have a pretty strong opinion on stand-ups. I believe stand-ups should happen daily. I don't think there's really any exceptions to that, and maybe that's a harsh opinion, but I would say it's critical. And the reason why I say daily stand-ups are essential is because, first, let's talk about in a team, right? I'm referring to team stand-ups, and then we can talk about cross-departmental. But if we talk about team stand-ups, the idea is if people are sitting next to each other at a desk and don't know what the other person is working on at all, then there's something wrong, in my opinion, right? And so I think that happens very often. Oh, I didn't know you were working on that. Oh, I didn't know you reached out to that vendor. I don't know you did that, right? These issues happen in a team, sometimes in people that are literally sitting right next to each other. And that, in my opinion, there's just no excuse to have that happen. So I think daily stand-ups are essential, mainly because I think it's like brushing your teeth, right? Do you say, yeah, brushing your teeth is good, but I think we'll do it every other week? No, it's a thing that you do every day, because you know that you have to work, you have to do that. You have to get in the routine. It's a routine, and there's a benefit to doing it. Now, I think the reason people avoid daily stand-ups is because they think, oh, I either don't have something to talk about, or it's too repetitive, or whatever else. But think about it. Not everyone is there every single day. When someone comes out, like let's say someone misses 3 days of the week. Well, did they miss the stand-up for that week now? So you don't know what's going on? So I think it's so critical that if you have a short stand-up where you're just saying, this is what I'm focused on today. This is a blocker that I have. This is what I need help with, whatever, right? Keep it super, super short. If you can do that, then you'll notice, oh, you're working on that? Oh, I can help you with that. Or, oh, I was doing that. I thought you were doing that. Okay, right? That stuff can happen, and it can all happen by having a 5-minute meeting, literally standing up next to your desk, next to each other, and getting these things sorted. And if you're introverts, it means even more why you have to do that, right? And so I think people misunderstand the purpose of stand-ups. Another thing I'd say as to why stand-ups I think have to be daily is because, again, in my opinion, if you're working on a team where you're doing a lot of initiatives, and let's say on a marketing team, that's very common. Maybe other teams this isn't applicable to as much, but development teams, right? Same sort of deal. If you're working on initiatives and you need to get a lot done within a period of a week, well, the idea of not having a daily stand-up seems kind of silly, right? So I think that you have to get a lot done, so you have to know what's going on today, what's going on tomorrow, what is she focused on today, what is he focused on, right? And then you can actually get that stuff done, because you have to be incredibly efficient to get a lot done in a 5-day period. And so without doing that, I think you can set out like a weekly meeting where you're saying, what are we focused on this week? But if on Tuesday and Wednesday something is off track, if you're not getting across in a 5 or 15-minute meeting what's going on and what's off track, how in the world are you going to get everything done within that period of a week? So I'm all about efficiency, and I think that it's very hard to be efficient if you're not communicating on a regular basis.
And I think having these regular stand-ups, like you're saying, also kind of contributes to a sense of accountability within the team itself. You eventually you're forced to talk about what you're working on. You can't just, hide under the table. And just making sure that projects get pushed forward every single day of the week, and sort of, having the manager present to all these stand-ups also allows to kind of take a sort of a higher level view and see, okay, now zooming out, how are we standing towards the monthly goal or quarterly goal? But this doesn't necessarily have to happen during the stand-up, but it does help a lot, just having kind of taking the pulse of what's happening within the team. What is your opinion on, if you have these daily stand-ups, do you have some type of record? Do you take kind of like short bullet point notes during the stand-up and then save them somewhere on, a project or project management tool, something like Asana or something along those lines, where you kind of have, a record of what has been discussed during a particular day of the week?
Yeah, it's a great question. I do use a tool called Coda for this, which I've referenced in the past, and I used it in different ways depending on the team, right? Because you want to work with the way that the company operates. So in one case, what we do is we do let's say a morning daily stand-up, in which case you are doing that ahead of time. So prior to the meeting, you're writing your bullet points, and then in the meeting, you're essentially reading your bullet points. You could say, oh, you don't need a meeting for that. Okay, fair enough. But if you're just reading them and they take, 3 minutes to write down and 3 minutes to state, well, then you're at least forcing people to not avoid them. Because I do think if you're just writing them down and everyone else is writing them down, it's unlikely that everyone's going to read what everyone else is doing, and they're going to have the excuse not to. Whereas if they're all attending the stand-up and they're forced now to plan for the meeting because they have to have it written down prior to the meeting, and then during the stand-up they have something to read off of, and they can expand a little bit if someone has a follow-up question, right? And then so now everyone is absolutely exposed to what's going on, and they can't be like, oh, I didn't see that, or I didn't notice that you were working on that, right? And so I think ahead of time is useful in that case. In another scenario, a company is working a little bit more on the EOS framework, in which case you do end-of-day reports. And so in that case, I do find that those status updates are useful at the end of the day, and you say, okay, this is what I've accomplished today, this is what I'm focused on tomorrow. And so either the beginning day or end of day, it really depends on the organization, how it's set up, but I think doing it in a way that's trackable is very useful. It's also useful for reviews, because when I review my direct reports in different companies, I find it useful to be able to go through and say, let me just filter by, this person, their daily stand-ups, let's see what they've accomplished. It's giving me reminders, because I don't have to go look through old Zoom meetings and transcripts trying to figure out what's going on. I can at a glance say, oh yeah, they were working on that, or oh yeah, we did accomplish that, and that's great. So I can do a quick scroll through, and I find that very useful. So I love having that accountability of something online. But what about you, Matteo? Have you done anything like that? Is it all on the spot for you, or do you like to actually note stuff down? And maybe this is for your own organizational structure as well. What do you have on your thoughts?
I've experimented with different methods. What I have noticed is that at the companies and teams I led in the past, after a while of following a certain sort of cadence, let's say daily stand-ups at 9 a.m. every morning, and then kind of having this kind of bullet points or sort of reminder notes of what we talked about, sort of in Asana or Basecamp or ClickUp, any of these tools essentially. What I noticed is that after a little bit, people didn't feel so excited about having these kind of meetings with the same kind of format. So what I try to do is try to mix it up a little bit. So at times we, reduce the frequency of the stand-ups to maybe 3 days a week, one on Monday, one on Wednesday, one on Friday. We also experimented with just having written priorities or written sort of stand-ups rather than having actual vocal stand-ups. everybody would have only write down, like you said, probably on Coda or some similar tool, and just have everyone review each other's kind of priorities for the day or the week. But I did notice that just having the written down version wasn't as kind of powerful in a way, because obviously people, yes, do read them, but once you read those of your colleagues or within the team, there's no really a lot of conversation going on, right? Because I mean, maybe at the very in the first couple of weeks, people would leave comments and say, okay, I'm actually working on a similar project. Maybe I can help you. Maybe I can do this for you, or maybe we can do this together. I need notice that the kind of the excitement of the of the new process kind of fizzles out, or decreases over time. So there was always a need for a new idea or a fresher way to keep the team interested in making or just making sure that there was knowledge sharing within it. Another thing that I did experiment with. Yeah, go ahead, Scott.
Well, sorry, don't mean to interrupt, but I've definitely experienced that as well. I'm really glad that you brought that up, that people can get tired of it or whatever else. But again, my pitch to this would be, yeah, like the team is always going to say, oh, I have to do that stand up. It's an accountability practice, right? And it's not supposed to be fun, in my opinion. I'm going to use the analogy again. Is brushing your teeth fun, right? You still do it, right? I think what we're talking about here is, are you willing to say that everyone must spend 10 or 5 to 15 minutes every day doing a thing, right? I mean, this is not asking someone to run a marathon. This is not, some big ask. And so I think people will complain about things. People will say, oh, do I really have to do that? Or these are getting repetitive. Can't we just do them every week? No. I mean, I think it's as simple as that. I mean, to me, if I'm your manager, I'm not there to be your best friend. I'm not there to, oh, you're feeling a little bit sad about this, I'm going to stop doing it. No, let me be clear. I do believe you should always listen. It's not like lead by I'm always right and whatever else. I think feedback is important, but I'm just saying, I think that we all get annoyed with the fact that we have to be held accountable, or that we have to repeat something or whatever else. And it's easy for us all to say, can't we just stop this? You probably also felt, if you reduce them, oh, good, I'm glad now I can have a little more freedom in the morning and have more deep focus time, or whatever it is. So we all have these feelings, but I still believe that it's a net negative when you stop doing it. Right? Because then it's every week, then you stop doing it, then it's every other week, and it's a bi-weekly thing and whatever else, and there's always a reason to stop doing it. But if you want to be a high-performing team, I think that, sorry, I'm going to say another thing on this. Not everyone is necessarily, not doing their fair share, not doing their work, or whatever else. But there are plenty of employees that I've seen that really didn't like doing stand-ups because they had to BS during the stand-up, right? And they're going to be the ones that are going to say, oh, do I really have to do this? I'm a really hard worker, and I, do whatever, but I don't like doing this thing. And I often find that the people that are hesitant to share a lot or share even a bit are sometimes the ones that just don't really want to be held accountable so much. So I'm not saying that's every case, but yeah, to me, it's really a non-negotiable.
No, I agree with you. Personally, one other thing that I did before in the past, when I was also told by my team members at times that they didn't know exactly what I was working on, simply because as the team leader, I wasn't doing the exact same work of my team. One thing that I did that helped was at the beginning of each month, I would make public my list of priorities or sort of the big projects of the month, and the sort of the milestones for each one of the big projects. So each project would have sort of subtasks to it or to them, and that would give everyone in the team visibility over my sort of almost like the entire schedule for the month. And that really helped a lot, not only because people now have visibility over what I did, but at times it happened that some people would even help with some of the tasks that I had on my plate, simply because, well, maybe somebody had more time available and they finished some of their own projects. They wanted to help out with things that were just a little different than what they're generally responsible for on a day-to-day basis, and they contributed to my work as well, which was a big win for the both of us, I would say, and for the company. So yeah, that was probably another important one for me. Yeah, another thing actually that I think could help, like we talked in the beginning, especially for new joiners, is just having documented processes, standard operating procedures, right? I mean, you could have standard operating procedures written down anywhere you want, wherever your knowledge hub or knowledge base is stored. You could have folders in Google Drive. You could have dedicated tools to actually have your knowledge base stored. So it could be, I don't know if ClickUp actually does, or Coda does have a knowledge base functionality. Potentially, yes. Other tools that come to mind are Notion. I think Notion is very popular for these type of things. But yeah, I guess, it's really easy. Just type knowledge base software. You probably get presented with tons of options there. But it's really more of a matter of keeping these knowledge bases up to date, making sure that whenever a new joiner actually joins the company, joins your team, and they follow the processes that you have documented before, they don't actually lose themselves. They actually know exactly what to do. But if they do actually find themselves struggling, that's maybe a sign that certain processes need to be revised and be updated there. Any other idea or option or?
Yeah, sure. So just to double down on your point of a knowledge base, I think that it's important. It's just like we were talking about any other subject. Knowledge base maintenance is not fun, right? But it's something you have to kind of constantly keep up to date. So if people are, quote, living in a certain area, that's probably where the knowledge base ideally is located. You don't necessarily want, if everyone's working every day in Asana, let's use that example, and then then your knowledge base is in some completely separate tool, or it's in Google Doc, or it's in Microsoft or whatever else. That's not always ideal. You at least have to link to those things, but just make sure that they're always connected and they're, quote, where people are living. And the other thing around that would be making sure that people, like, let's say you're talking and during a daily stand-up, someone's saying, oh, I just found out this new thing and we have to change the way we're doing this. Then that's a perfect time to say, oh, make sure that the knowledge base is updated. Make sure that the SOP is updated. That's just one of those things where everything has to be reminded. And then not only that, let's say someone says, hey, can you give me instructions? I need to figure out how to do this. I would always say, get them to where it needs to be living, right? So instead of doing it for them, yeah, let me come over to your computer and do it. It's like, yeah, that's actually in the knowledge base. I'd be happy to help, but I want you to look at that first and see if that works. And then if you've run into any issues there, then just call me over. As soon as you give people a shortcut and say, no, you can just go this other way where it's not going to the knowledge base to get that information, well, now you're not supporting the knowledge base. And so I think it's so important that you're always pushing people back to those best practices, the way you operate as a team. Now, you asked the question of any other things. You mentioned knowledge base. We mentioned stand-ups. Another one that comes to mind is cross-team. So I don't think I would necessarily call this a stand-up anymore, but if you have a cross-team meeting that usually I do this on a monthly basis, to be honest with you, but there's a level of, it could be an all-hands meeting. It could be a meeting where it's different department heads going in and talking about something, but have something where essentially all the different departments, all the different teams are at least getting in the same room talking about what they're focused on to some level, right? Because people do need to know what's going on, and hopefully that can cascade down to the different team members. So let's say it's all the team leaders getting together for a monthly internal management meeting, right? Then at least they can talk about what's HR working on, what's this problem that's going on, what's this finance thing that's going on, what's this, employee churn thing that's going on. Everyone is at least knowing what's going on across the departments, and then it's the manager's responsibilities for cascading those messages down to the individual team members on their team. So that's a reason that you don't necessarily need to have, if you have a 50-person team, 50 people all going into a conference room and wasting all those people hours during that. You can certainly use the cascading method, but I think having that on also set basis, like I said, just like the daily stand-ups, I always think they should be daily. Monthly cross-team meetings or whatever should be monthly. Potentially you do them bi-weekly even. It sort of depends on your team operation, but have them on a regular fixed schedule.
I like it. Yes. I think we've got to the end of our episode, Scott. We've talked a lot about processes. We talked about just making sure we include people in the conversation. Do you have any parting words before we close this episode?
Yeah, I think this is the thing I always say. It's that these things aren't always easy. If you're not comfortable making org charts, if you're not comfortable doing SOPs, whatever it may be, I just think that that avoidance is only going to make the problem worse. So even if your team doesn't like having stand-ups or whatever, I would say at least try to implement some of these things and see if you get some positives out of them. I think that you would, even if your team doesn't like them the first time. So that's my only thing. Push it forward, even if it's not fun, and it's gonna benefit your team. It's gonna benefit your operational efficiency, and I say go for it.
Yeah, keep a structure and follow it. Thank you so much, Scott. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for this episode. As usual, you can listen to this episode on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, and watch the recording on YouTube, where you can also leave comments and let us know if you have any topic ideas that you would like us to cover in future episodes. Thank you so much, and see you next time.